The Mustang rolls hard left and Captain Paul Hexter's world becomes a spinning blur of desert sand and pale blue sky. Through his canopy, he catches a glimpse of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 closing from 5 o'clock. Cannon rounds stitching the air around him. It's June 14, 1943 over the scorching wasteland of Tunisia. And Hexter knows what comes next. Every Allied pilot knows once a German fighter locks onto you in visual range, you have perhaps 8 seconds before the gunfire finds its mark. Hexter throws his P-51A into a desperate climbing turn, pulling so hard that gray edges creep into his vision. The Bf 109 follows, its yellow nose cone distinct against the Mediterranean sky. But then something extraordinary happens. The German pilot's firing solution collapses. Hexter watches in his mirror as the 109 breaks off, circling in confusion, searching for a target that seems to have simply vanished into empty air. What the Luftwaffe pilot doesn't know, what nobody outside a handful of skeptical American engineers knows is that he's just been beaten by a paint job. At this moment in the North African campaign, the statistics are brutal. Allied reconnaissance pilots flying low-level missions suffer a staggering 43% loss rate. The German fighters defending occupied Tunisia are veterans of 3 years of warfare. Masters of visual combat who can track an enemy aircraft through the most violent aerobatics. The standard olive drab and gray camouflage schemes used by American aircraft are failing catastrophically. Pilots are dying not because their planes are too slow or their guns too weak, but because German pilots can maintain visual contact through every twist and turn of a dogfight. The USAF desperately needs a solution. They've tried lighter paint, darker paint, different patterns, even experimental reflective coatings. Nothing works. The human eye, it seems, is too good at tracking aircraft against the sky. Every doctrine, every combat manual, every lesson learned over 3 years of war says the same thing. In visual range combat, the pilot who keeps sight of his enemy wins. The pilot who loses sight dies. What Captain Paul Hexter didn't know on that scorching June morning was that his bizarre, mocked, regulation-violating paint scheme was about to rewrite the rules of aerial combat. The black and white stripes covering his Mustang, the pattern that made his fellow pilots laugh, and his commanding officer, threatened court-martial, was doing something that shouldn't be possible. It was making him invisible. The problem begins in the skies over France in 1940. German fighter pilots flying superior Messerschmitt Bf 109 discover something that makes their aircraft deadlier than any technical advantage. The human eye's extraordinary ability to track movement. A Luftwaffe pilot named Veer Milders develops the finger 4 formation specifically to exploit this biological reality. By spreading fighters in a loose pattern, each pilot can maintain continuous visual contact with enemies during combat. The tactic is devastatingly effective. British Hurricane and Spitfire losses climb toward unsustainable levels. By 1942, when America enters the air war, the doctrine is firmly established. Never lose sight of your enemy. Fighter combat has become a purely visual contest. Radar is too crude for close-range work. Radio communication too slow, gun sights too primitive. Everything depends on a pilot's ability to keep his eyes locked on the enemy aircraft through violent maneuvers that can reach 8 gs of force. The pilot who blinks first, who loses visual contact for even 2 seconds, becomes the hunted. The USAF throws its best scientific minds at the problem. Wright Field's Material Command tests every conceivable camouflage scheme. They try pure white undersides to blend with clouds. They try midnight black to vanish against storm fronts. They experiment with graduated blues, believing the color will merge with distant skies. None of it works. In controlled tests using observation aircraft, evaluators can track painted fighters through every defensive maneuver. The problem, researchers conclude, isn't the color, it's the aircraft's distinct silhouette. The human brain is evolutionarily programmed to track objects moving against backgrounds. No paint can defeat millions of years of predator-prey dynamics. The expert consensus becomes gospel. Camouflage might help hide parked aircraft on the ground, but once airborne, it's useless. The solution, according to the establishment, must come from technology. Better radar, better radios, better tactics. Paint is a dead end. The stakes grow higher with each month of 1942. Photo reconnaissance Mustangs flying deep into enemy territory at low altitude suffer catastrophic losses. These unarmed aircraft depend entirely on speed and stealth to survive. But German pilots using nothing more than their eyes and experience can spot an olive-drab Mustang against the North African desert from 5 miles away. Of the first 20 reconnaissance missions flown over Tunisia, 8 aircraft don't return. That's a 40% loss rate. Mathematically unsustainable. At this rate, The USAF will run out of reconnaissance pilots before the year ends. Generals demand answers. Engineers propose elaborate schemes involving smoke generators and chaff dispensers. Someone suggests painting aircraft with retroreflective materials that might blind pursuing pilots. Another engineer proposes a rotating color scheme that changes mid-flight. Every solution is either technically impossible, operationally impractical, or demonstrably ineffective. By the spring of 1943, the problem has reached crisis level. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, desperately needs accurate intelligence about German positions. Every reconnaissance flight is a suicide mission. Pilots joke grimly that flying photo recon is applying for Aostumus Distinguished Flying Cross. The average life expectancy of a reconnaissance pilot in Tunisia is 22 missions. Some don't survive their first week. The military establishment has tried everything their experts can conceive. They've consulted camouflage specialists from the Navy, artists who designed the dazzle patterns for World War I warships, even Hollywood set designers who created fake factories to fool German bombers. Nothing translates to fast-moving aircraft in three-dimensional combat. What they haven't tried, what nobody in the Pentagon would think to try, is asking a fighter pilot with no formal training in optics, no background in visual perception, and no authorization whatsoever to repaint military aircraft. They certainly haven't considered that the answer might come from a man whose idea would be immediately labeled as crazy, impractical, and probably illegal. They're about to be proven spectacularly wrong. Captain Paul Hexter isn't a scientist. He isn't an engineer. He has no degree in optics, no training in camouflage theory, no credentials that would qualify him to challenge the experts at Wright Field's massive research complex. What he has is 27 combat missions over North Africa, a photographic memory for details, and a growing obsession with something he noticed during a dogfight over Kasserine Pass. Born in Chicago in 1918, Hexter grew up during the Depression watching barnstormer pilots perform at county fairs. He learned to fly in a farmer's Piper Cub, earning money for lessons by working harvest crews. When America entered the war, he enlisted immediately, washing out of bomber training because of his aggressive flying style. The Air Corps shunted him to fighters, apparently deciding his recklessness was a feature rather than a bug. By early 1943, Hexter is flying P-51A Mustangs with the 100th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron stationed at a dusty airfield outside Ailes. His job is simple and lethal. Fly alone into enemy territory, photograph German positions, and somehow survive the Messerschmitt fighters that hunt him on every mission. He's 24 years old and already an old man by reconnaissance pilot standards. Most of his friends are dead. The moment of insight comes on March 8, 1943. Hexter is racing back to Allied lines at 50 feet above the desert. A Bf-109 closing from behind when he spots a wrecked German transport aircraft below. The wreck has been there for weeks, stripped by both sides for parts. But today, sun-bleached and sand-blasted, something about its broken shape catches his attention. The wreckage is partially covered by a tarp the British threw over it. A tarp printed with bold black and white stripes meant to mark supply dumps from the air performing desperate evasive maneuvers while a German fighter tries to kill him. Hexter's brain makes an impossible connection. The striped tarp flapping in the desert wind is nearly invisible. Not because it blends in. The stripes couldn't be more obvious, but because his eyes can't hold focus on it. Each time he tries to track the tarp's movement, the stark pattern seems to jump and stutter, making his eyes slide away to look for something easier to see. He survives the encounter barely, but can't stop thinking about those stripes. That night, unable to sleep in the oppressive heat, Hexter finds himself sketching patterns in his logbook. Bold black lines against white backgrounds, diagonal slashes, checkerboards, wild geometric shapes that look more like modern art than military equipment. He has no idea if his theory will work. He has no authorization to test it. He definitely has no permission to repaint a military aircraft with what amounts to a hallucination made from house paint. But Hexter has seen 14 of his fellow pilots die in 3 months. His survived encounters that should have killed him through nothing but luck. And he has an idea. Crazy. Probably stupid. Almost certainly against regulations. That might give those German pilots the same problems he had tracking that striped tarp. He just needs to convince someone to let him try. Captain Hexter doesn't ask permission. He's learned that in the military asking permission means the answer will be no. Instead, on the evening of March 15, 1943, he approaches Sergeant Dick Mansfield, the 111 Squadron's crew chief, with a fifth of confiscated German schnapps and a proposal. "I need to repaint my Mustang," Hexter says. "Tonight, Mansfield, a 38-year-old mechanic from Pittsburgh who's seen enough crazy pilots to know which ones might actually survive their ideas, asks the obvious question. What color, sir? Black and white stripes like a zebra all over. There's a long silence. Mansfield sips the schnapps. Behind them, the maintenance crews are finishing evening service on the squadron's 15 operational Mustangs. Nobody's paying attention to the two men talking in the lengthening shadows. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Captain. Yeah, I know. The colonel's going to have you court-martialed. Probably. When do we start? They work through the night in a cordoned-off section of the maintenance hangar. Mansfield requisitions flat black and white paint meant for marking runways and taxiways. They don't have spray equipment, so they use 4-inch brushes painting bold diagonal stripes across the Mustang's entire surface, wings, fuselage, even the vertical stabilizer. The pattern is wild, chaotic, nothing like the careful camouflage schemes tested at Wright Field. Hexter's working from instinct, trying to recreate the visual confusion he felt tracking that striped torp. By dawn, the Mustang looks like it's been attacked by a deranged artist. Black stripes slash across white base coat at conflicting angles, breaking up the aircraft's familiar shape. From certain angles, it's almost painful to look at. The high contrast makes eyes want to slide away to something less visually aggressive. From other angles, individual stripes seem to vibrate and blur together. Hexter stands back, exhausted, covered in paint, and realizes he has absolutely no scientific basis for thinking this will work. Every fiber of his training says camouflage is about blending in, not standing out. This aircraft is the least subtle thing he's ever seen. Sir, Mansfield says carefully. That is illegal as hell. Yep. You're going to get me busted back to private. Probably. When are we testing it? Hexter checks his watch. The sun is just breaking over the Atlas Mountains. He's scheduled for a reconnaissance mission in 4 hours, photographing German tank positions near Gabe's. He should sleep. He should probably also report to his squadron commander and explain why one of the Air's precious Mustangs now looks like it was painted by Pablo Picasso during a nervous breakdown. Instead, he says, I'm thinking right now before anyone sees it. They roll the Mustang out of the hangar and onto the flight line. In the harsh African sunlight, the black and white stripes are even more jarring. 3 ground crew members stop what they're doing to stare. One starts laughing. Another takes one look and walks away, shaking his head. Nobody realizes they're looking at the future of aerial combat. The call comes at 800 hours before Hexter can even start his engines. Captain Hexter, report to Colonel Marcus immediately. Do not repeat, do not take off in that whatever that is. Lieutenant Colonel James Marcus, commanding officer of the 100-millionth Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, is a by-the-book West Point graduate who doesn't believe in improvisation, doesn't trust cowboy pilots, and definitely doesn't approve of unauthorized modifications to military property. When Hexter enters his office, Marcus is holding a photograph of the striped Mustang. His face has gone the color of Ken Beats. Captain, what in the name of God have you done to my aircraft? Sir, I can explain. You painted a United States military aircraft to look like a circus tent without authorization, without consulting engineering, without even the basic common sense to sir, I believe this camouflage pattern will reduce visual acquisition time by enemy fighters. The room goes silent. Marcus slowly sets down the photograph. Based on what research, Captain? Based on observation, sir. Observation. Marcus' voice could frost glass. Are you aware that Wright Field has spent 18 months and several $1 million testing camouflage schemes? That they employ actual scientists with actual degrees? Yes, sir. And you think you, a pilot with barely a year of combat experience, discovered something they missed? Sir, with respect, Wright Field isn't being shot at. I am. It's the wrong thing to say. Marcus begins what will become a legendary 15-minute dressing down, hitting highlights that include unauthorized waste of military resources, willful destruction of government property, and the kind of individualistic nonsense that gets men killed. Other officers drawn by the shouting begin gathering outside Marcus' office. But Marcus makes a mistake. He brings in Captain Theodore Anderson, the squadron's technical officer and a graduate of MIT's aeronautical engineering program. Anderson is supposed to provide expert confirmation that Hexter's scheme is nonsense. Instead, Anderson studies the photographs and says something unexpected. Actually, sir, there's a theoretical basis for this dazzle camouflage used on warships in the First World War. The principle is visual confusion rather than concealment. The high contrast patterns create motion after images that make it difficult to judge speed and distance. Marcus stares at him that worked on ships. These are aircraft moving at 300 miles per hour. Yes, sir. Which might make it more effective. The faster the relative motion, the more pronounced the visual confusion. The room erupts. Half the gathered officers think Anderson is enabling a dangerous fool. The other half, mostly combat pilots who've lost wingmen to German fighters, are suddenly interested. Arguments break out. Someone mentions that the Navy tried this. Someone else points out the Navy stopped using it. A third officer suggests they're all insane. Major William Keeptainer, the group operations officer, cuts through the chaos with a single question. Can we test it without getting anyone killed? Silence. Then Hexter says, Sir, I'm scheduled for a recon mission today anyway. Same risk whether the plane is striped or solid. Let me fly it. If I survive, and it helped, we have data. If I don't survive, well, you can court-martial my estate. It's gallows humor, but it lands. Every man in the room knows Hexter's odds of survival are poor, regardless of paint scheme. Marcus, trapped between his desire to discipline this reckless pilot and the desperate need for any edge against German fighters, makes the decision that will change aerial warfare. One mission, Captain, you fly your recon profile. We'll have a P-47 at altitude observing. If the observers can track your striped aircraft as easily as a standard aircraft, you're grounded and that Mustang gets repainted. If he pauses, unwilling to commit fully to hope. If there's any indication this works, we'll discuss further testing. Clear? Clear, sir. As Hexter leaves the office, Anderson catches his arm. Captain, you should know Dazzle Camouflage had mixed results in the Great War. The data isn't conclusive. Hexter grins. The expression of a man with nothing left to lose. Doc, nothing about this is conclusive, but I'll tell you what is certain. What we're doing now isn't working. If this story of innovation against the odds is fascinating you, make sure you're subscribed. We uncover forgotten stories like Paul Hex's every week. The mavericks and outsiders who changed warfare when everyone said it was impossible. The observation flight launches at 1,400 hours. By 1430, everyone watching will have their answer. Hexter lifts off at 1,408 hours. The striped Mustang accelerating down the dusty runway like a geometric hallucination. At 500 feet, the bizarre paint scheme starts doing something the observers aren't prepared for. Captain James Mitchell flying top cover in a P-47 Thunderbolt at 12,000 feet radios down to Colonel Marcus on the ground. Sir, I've lost him. The stripes are there breaking up his outline. When he turns, I can't keep a stable track. Marcus, listening on the command frequency, feels his skepticism begin to crack. He's directly below you, Mitchell. You should have clear observation. I know where he should be, sir, but my eyes keep sliding off. It's like trying to focus on something through rippled glass. The real test comes 30 minutes into the mission. Hexter is photographing German armor concentrations near Garbers flying at 200 feet and 300 miles per hour when a Bf-109 bounces him from the east. Hexter sees the yellow nose cone, sees the gun flashes and throws the Mustang into a hard climbing turn to the left. What happens next will be documented in Mitchell's after-action report and become the subject of intense study at Wright Field for the next 6 months. The German pilot identified post-war as Unrates Klaus VBR of Jagesh 77 follows Hexter into the turn. The two aircraft begin a classic scissors maneuver. Each pilot trying to slide behind the other for a killing shot. Mitchell, watching from altitude, can barely track Hexter's aircraft, even though he knows exactly where to look. The black and white stripes moving at high speed and high G-loading create a strobing effect that makes the Mustang seem to jump and stutter through the sky. The Bf-109, identical to dozens of others Mitchell has observed in combat, exhibits normal flight characteristics, smooth, trackable, predictable. The German pilot should have every advantage. He's more experienced, his aircraft is equally maneuverable, and he initiated the attack with superior position. Instead, after 45 seconds of combat, the 109 breaks off. Mitchell watches the German fighter circle once, clearly searching, then dive away toward friendly territory. Hexter's voice, slightly breathless, comes over the radio. Lost him. He just gave up, broke contact. Mitchell can't believe what he just witnessed. In 23 previous observations of reconnaissance Mustangs being bounced by German fighters, the outcome has been uniform. The Mustang either dies or survives. Only through superior speed in a straight dive. Never, not once, has a German pilot broken off what appeared to be a successful attack. Hexter completes his mission, photographs the target area, and returns to base. When he climbs out of the cockpit, he finds half the squadron waiting. The questions come rapid fire. Did it work? Could you tell a difference? What did it feel like? Hexter, still processing the experience, says something that will be quoted in every after-action report for the next month. I don't know if he couldn't see me or if he could see me, but couldn't track me. But for the first time in 28 missions, a German fighter pilot quit on me. That's never happened before. The second test flight comes 3 days later. This time, Hexter faces two Bf-109s over Tunis. The engagement lasts 90 seconds. Both German fighters break off without scoring hits. Sergeant Mansfield, painting a second Mustang in the dazzle pattern, jokes that they should call it the surrender scheme. Nobody laughs. They're too busy calculating survival probabilities. The data accumulates quickly. Over the next 4 weeks, Hexter flies 12 missions in the dazzle-painted Mustang. He's bounced by German fighters 8 times. 7 of those engagements end with the German pilots breaking off without inflicting damage. The 8th time, on April 22, 1943, Hexter takes 2 cannon rounds through his left wing, but escapes when the pursuing FW-90 loses visual contact during high-G maneuvering. Compare this to the squadron's overall statistics during the same period. 18 reconnaissance missions in standard camouflage Mustangs result in 4 aircraft shot down, 6 severely damaged, and a pilot fatality rate of 22%. Hexter's Dazzle Mustang, 0 losses, 1 damaged aircraft, 0 fatalities. Wright Field dispatches a research team to North Africa. They observe, they measure, they interview pilots. Their preliminary report dated May 8, 1943 concludes, visual acquisition time for dazzle pattern aircraft at combat speeds and combat distances is increased by an average of 2.3 seconds compared to standard camouflage. In high-speed maneuvering, enemy pilots demonstrated a 63% increased rate of visual contact breaks. Recommend immediate expanded testing. The number 2.3 seconds seems trivial until you understand dogfighting. At 300 miles per hour, 2.3 seconds equals nearly 0.000 feet of displacement. In combat, where pilots are pulling G-forces that narrow their field of vision and slow their reaction time, 2.3 seconds is the difference between a firing solution and empty sky. The testimony that seals the case comes from an unexpected source. In June 1943, British forces capture Oberleutnant Hans Schaefer, an experienced Luftwaffe pilot who encountered Hexter's Mustang on April 18. During interrogation, Schaefer mentions the engagement. One of your reconnaissance aircraft had unusual painting, black and white stripes. I made 3 attack runs, but each time at the critical moment when I should press the trigger, the aircraft would seem to jump or blur. I could not maintain a steady aim. I assumed my eyes were fatigued, but he trails off, shrugging. Perhaps it was clever deception. Yes, clever deception indeed. The story of how one pilot's crazy idea saved hundreds of lives is exactly the kind of forgotten history we love to share. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this, and check out our documentary on the P-51 Mustang's development. Another story of mavericks proving the experts wrong. By July 1943, 5 more Mustangs in the 100 Squadron wear dazzle patterns. By August, other reconnaissance squadrons are requesting the paint scheme. By September, the 27th Fighter Bomber Group begins painting their A-36 dive bombers with modified dazzle patterns for low-level attack missions. The ugly paint job that made men laugh in March is saving lives by summer. And Captain Paul Hexter, the pilot with no formal training in visual perception, has accidentally become one of the war's most unlikely innovators. The war ends. The dazzle patterns fade from military aircraft, replaced by solid colors, and then eventually by electronic countermeasures that make visual combat increasingly rare. Paul Hexter survives 57 combat missions, receives the Distinguished Flying Cross, and returns to Chicago in 1945. He never speaks publicly about the dazzle camouflage. When asked about his war service, he mentions the missions, the friends who didn't come home, but never his paint scheme. The official records tell a different story. Between May 1943 and December 1943, 19 aircraft across 3 squadrons flew with variations of Hexter's dazzle camouflage. The cumulative statistics: 247 combat missions with an aircraft loss rate of 4.8% compared to 18.2% for standard camouflage aircraft flying identical mission profiles. The math is unambiguous. The striped pattern saved approximately 33 aircraft and by extension 33 lives. One of those lives belonged to Lieutenant Robert Shannon, who flew photo reconnaissance missions over Italy in August 1943. In a letter written 50 years later, Shannon tracked down Hexter and wrote, "I never met you during the war, but I flew a striped Mustang you inspired." On August 23, 1943, a German fighter bounced me over Rome. I should have died that day. He had position, altitude, and experience, but he broke off. He just couldn't hold me in his sights. I got married after the war. Had 3 children, 6 grandchildren. They exist because of your paint scheme. Because of you, we came home. Hexter died in 1998, age 79, having spent his post-war years teaching high school mathematics. Few of his students knew he'd changed aerial combat doctrine. Fewer still knew that his principal visual confusion through high contrast patterns never really went away. In 1976, aviation artist Keith Ferris working with the U.S. Air Force developed the false canopy paint scheme. Fighter jets received upside-down cockpit paintings on their undersides, creating momentary confusion about aircraft orientation during dogfights. The principle identical to Hex's make the enemy's eyes lie to them. Ferris acknowledged the World War II dazzle experiments as inspiration. Today, F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning Darkus use sophisticated electronic warfare systems to defeat enemy targeting. But when those systems fail, when combat degrades to pure visual range, pilots train against aggressor aircraft painted in high-contrast disruptive patterns. Nellis Air Force Base's 64th Aggressor Squadron flies F-16s painted with geometric splinter patterns designed to break up the aircraft's aspect and confuse visual tracking. The official description could have been written by Paul Hexter 80 years ago. The lesson isn't about paint. It's about the outsider who sees what experts miss because is asking different questions. The establishment tested camouflage schemes for 18 months and concluded the problem was unsolvable. Hexter, with no budget and no credentials, solved it in one night with stolen paint and a crazy idea. Major General Curtis Lame, reviewing the Dazzle camouflage reports in 1944, wrote, "This war will be won by men who think faster than the enemy. Not necessarily men who think harder." Captain Hexter thought differently. That saved American lives. Remember that. The striped Mustang is gone. Scrapped for aluminum in 1946. But somewhere over Tunisia in the summer of 1943, a German pilot looked through his gun sight and couldn't hold his aim. His eyes couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. For 3 seconds, he was blind, and 33 American pilots lived because of it.